No, said the Duke of Corendon, without lifting his eyes from the fire. You may choose my wine, madam, and my dinner hour, and the colour of the drawing-room curtains. You will not choose my wife. The Dowager Duchess Augusta did not so much as blink. She sat as she always sat, very upright in the tall chair by the window of the saloon at Renholt, her hands folded on the head of her stick, and she looked at her grandson the way a general looks at a bridge he intends to cross whether it holds or not. I have chosen her, she said. It is done. It is undone. Osric set his glass down on the mantel with a click that rang through the room. I am 35, not 15. I have buried a father, I have paid his debts, I have dragged this house out of the mud he left it in, and I have done it without asking one living soul's leave. And you would have me stand in a church and take a woman I have never courted, never chosen, never so much as thought of, handed to me like a horse at auction, with her teeth shown and her paces guaranteed. A horse at auction, his grandmother repeated, tasting the phrase. How elegant you are when you are angry. Your grandfather was the same. He shouted in couplets. Madam, sit down, Osric. I will not. Then stand, she said comfortably, and be tall at me. It is a great advantage being tall. It has never once made anyone right. He turned from the fire. Rain was going down the long windows in slow ropes, and beyond them the park lay grey and swimming, the beaches half drowned, the lake pitted like hammered pewter. 3 carriages had come up that drive in a fortnight, each with a mother in it and a daughter beside her, each daughter arranged upon the seat like a bonnet in a milliner's window. He had been civil. He had been so exquisitely civil that his own steward had asked afterwards, with some anxiety, whether his grace were unwell. You have had them paraded through this house all season, he said. You have had me handed cups of tea by every heiress between here and the coast. I have not complained. I have been shown, and I have been priced, and I have said nothing, out of respect for your years and your affection. But I will not be led to the altar by the elbow. Whatever name is in your head, madam, take it out again. I do not want to hear it. You will hear it, said the Dowager Duchess Augusta, because I am 81, and I intend to be dead before you are sensible, and I should like to leave the thing tidy. Say it then, he snapped, and be done, and I shall refuse it, and we may both go in to dinner having enjoyed ourselves. She said it, Hesper Mowbray. The rain went on down the glass. Somewhere below, a door closed and a servant's feet crossed the hall, and a spoon rang once against a china cup. The Duke of Corendon stood quite still, he said, and his grandmother smiled, not kindly. It was the smile of a woman who has laid a card down and finds that has fallen precisely where she meant it to fall. There, she said softly. There it is. That is the whole of my argument, and you have made it for me, and I did not have to say a word. I am not. He stopped. He heard himself. Who? He had said who as if she had named a stranger, a name out of a parish register, a person he had never met. He had met her. He knew, in the same breath that he said the word, that he had met her. The name had a shape in his mouth. Hesper. He had heard it spoken across rooms in that flat, careless, summoning way. Hesper, my shawl. Hesper, the drops. Hesper, do not be tiresome, fetch it yourself, you know where it is kept. He had heard it perhaps 200 times in 5 years, and he had never once turned his head to see who answered to it. She is Drusilla Vance's cousin, his grandmother said, watching him. Or her husband's cousin's daughter. The connection is remote enough that Drusilla can call her family when there is a bill to be shared, and a companion when there is a shawl to be carried. Her father was a scholar with no money and a great many books. He died. The books were sold. She was 21 and had £4 a year, and Drusilla took her in, and has had 11 years of unpaid nursing, unpaid letter writing, unpaid account keeping, and unpaid patience out of her since, at a cost of her keep and 2 gowns a year. You are describing a governess. I am describing a lady, said the Dowager Duchess, who has been in the same room as you at least 40 times, and whom you have never seen. He wanted to deny it. He found he could not open his mouth. She was in the blue drawing-room at Ferrers when you argued the enclosure bill with the bishop. His grandmother went on, remorseless, standing behind Drusilla's chair for 2 hours with a work-bag. She was in the gallery at the Hartwell ball, mending Sidonie Frane's flounce on her knees while Sidonie stood on a chair and complained. She was at my own table at Michaelmas, Osric at my table, 4 places down from you, and you handed the salt past her to Lady Marchmore, and you did not see the hand that took it and set it down. Madam, you are not cruel, said Augusta. You are worse. You are absent. It is the great fault of your house, and your grandfather had it, and it took me 30 years to cure him of it, and I have not 30 years left to spend on you. The fire cracked. Osric put a hand on the mantel, and looked into it, and did not see it. And so, he said at last, and his voice came out lower than he intended, your remedy is to marry me to a woman I cannot even bring to mind. My remedy, said his grandmother, is to make you look at her. Marry her or do not. I have no power to drag you anywhere, and we both know it. But you will look. I have arranged that you shall look. Arranged? How? They come on Thursday, said the Dowager Duchess Augusta, for a fortnight. Drusilla Vance, her daughter Arabella, Lady Sidonie Frayne and her mother, and the Frayne cousins, and my nephew's dull boy. 22 of them, Osric, and a ball at the end of it. And I have already sent the cards, so do not trouble yourself to look thunderous. It is far too late to be interesting. He stared at her. You have filled my house. I have filled my house, she said serenely. You may have it back when I am under the chapel floor. And among the 22, quite unregarded, in the 3rd carriage with the boxes will come Hesper Mowbray, because Drusilla cannot go 3 days without someone to hold her salts. Nobody will have looked at her when she gets down. Nobody ever does. The old woman's eyes were suddenly not sly at all, but hard and bright. I am 81. I have watched the pretty ones sharpen their teeth on that girl for 11 years. She has never once answered them back where it could be heard, and she has never once broken. Do you know how rare that is, Osric? I have known duchesses who could not stand a wet afternoon. Then pension her, he said roughly. Give her a cottage. Give her 500 a year. Give her, I will do it tonight. I will write to Pargeter in the morning. It does not require that I marry her. No, said his grandmother. It does not. It requires only that you buy her off and never think of her again, which is precisely what your father would have done, and precisely what every man in that house on Thursday will do. And it is why she will be dead at 60 in a hired room with a cat and a mended glove and no one to send for. She stood slowly, both hands on her stick, and she was small, and she did not look small. I have not asked you for anything in 15 years, I ask this. Look at her. If, having looked, you find nothing, then I shall say no more about it, and I shall die disappointed in you, which will inconvenience neither of us for long. She went out. The door shut behind her with great gentleness, which was worse than a slam. Osric stood a long while at the window with the rain running down. Who he had said it, who, and the shame of it was still moving in him, low and cold, like water finding a crack. He was not a man who lied to himself. It was, perhaps, his only virtue, and he had paid for it. So he stood there and made himself do the thing he had been avoiding since she spoke the name, which was to remember a work-bag, a grey stuff gown, a pair of hands. He could see hands, if he could see nothing else, quick, capable, unornamented hands, moving over a torn flounce. And then, quite suddenly, out of nowhere, he had a voice. It had been at Ferrers in the summer. The bishop had been very fine and very stupid about the labourers, and Osric had been 10 minutes into the argument and enjoying himself. And old Vance had said something about the poor being poor because they were idle, and Osric had turned to answer him, and from somewhere behind Drusilla Vance's chair, low, perfectly composed, pitched to be heard by nobody and heard, he now understood, by him a woman's voice had said, "How fortunate that idleness has never troubled this room." He had laughed. He remembered laughing. He remembered turning his head, and finding nothing there but ladies and a work-bag and the corner of a window, and thinking he had imagined it, and going back to the bishop. He had laughed, and he had not looked. The Duke of Quarrendon stood in his grandmother's yellow saloon with his hand flat on the cold glass, and discovered, with something very like alarm, that he did not intend to be managed, and that he was going to be at the door on Thursday when the 3rd carriage came up. They arrived at 4 in a thin grey drizzle, and it was as she had said. He stood on the steps with his hat in his hand and watched the pretty ones come down. Lady Sidonie Frayne descended from the 1st carriage, as though she were being lowered from heaven for the improvement of the district. A straw-gold beauty in celestial blue, with a laugh she brought out like a jewel case, and she gave him her hand and said, "Your Grace, you have made it rain to keep us indoors with you," and he heard himself say something civil. Arabella Vance came next, dark and glossy and 18, watching Sidonie to see how it was done. Drusilla Vance came third, and was helped down by 2 footmen and complained about the steps. And then the third carriage at the far end, half behind the laurels with the boxes lashed on the back. Nobody went to it. The door was opened from the inside, and a woman got down without waiting for the step, in a grey travelling dress that had been turned at least once. And she did not look at the house. She looked at the boxes. She counted them with her eyes, moving her lips slightly. And then she said something quiet to the coachman that made him grin and touch his hat. And she gathered up a shawl, a workbag, a lap desk, a bandbox, and a spaniel that was trying to die of excitement, and she began to walk to the door with all of it, in the rain, unregarded. While 20 people stood about in the porch talking, she was perhaps 30. She was not beautiful. She had a plain, still, clever face, and dark hair pinned back without any nonsense, and rain on her lashes. And Osric, Duke of Corendon, who had refused an hour ago to be handed a wife, went down his own wet steps in front of the whole party, and took the bandbox out of her hands. She looked up at him, that was all. She did not gasp, or blush, or drop anything, or say, "Oh, Your Grace." She looked up at him with a kind of level, unhurried attention, as if he were a sum she had not expected to be asked to do, and then she said, in a low voice he knew instantly, "It is only a bandbox, Your Grace. It contains Mrs. Vance's caps." "Then I shall carry Mrs. Vance's caps," said Osric. "You will be very grand doing it," she said, and handed him the lap desk as well. Behind him he heard the porch go quiet. He did not care. He walked up his own steps beside her with a bandbox under one arm and a lap desk under the other, and the spaniel wound itself twice round his boots, and he heard Sidonie Frayne say, brightly, to the company at large, how charitable he is. He would carry a fishwife's basket, I dare say, if she brought it to the door, and heard, quite distinctly, the low answer, meant for nobody, dropped beside him like a coin into water. He would be spared the fish, at least, if he carried it at the front. He turned his head. She was looking straight ahead, entirely grave. "You said something," he said. "I never do," said Hesper Mowbray, and went in. He was late to dinner, which was unlike him, because he had stood too long in his dressing room with his coat half on, listening to a footman talk and not hearing a word. At table he watched her. It was not difficult. Nobody else was doing it, and so there was no competition for the sight line. She had been put at the far end between the dull nephew and a deaf clergyman, in a black gown so unremarkable that his eye kept sliding off her by habit and having to be dragged back. He watched her cut up the clergyman's meat for him, without a word, without making anything of it, so smoothly that the old man never noticed it had been done. He watched her turn the conversation twice gently, when the nephew began to founder. He watched Drusilla Vance call down the table, "Hesper, Hesper." "My drops," in the voice one uses to a dog one does not much like, and watched Hesper rise and go the length of the room and back, and sit down again, and take up her fork exactly where she had left it, and eat as if nothing had occurred. He watched Sidonie Frayne tell a very long story about a milliner, and watched Hesper Mowbray listen to it with an expression of perfect civility, and watched something flicker, very briefly at the corner of her mouth, a small private amusement, held down hard. Extinguished before it could be seen. He was ashamed of his own attention. It felt like theft. He had been in rooms with this woman for 5 years, and he was learning her at his own dinner table like a stranger studying a hand of cards, and every single thing he learned was an accusation. "You are not attending, Your Grace," said Sidonie sweetly from his right. "No," he agreed, "I am not." It was a hard fortnight. He had said he would not be managed, and he was not managed. He was undone instead, which was worse, and by nothing at all, by trifles, by scraps, by the small daily evidence of a life spent being useful to people who did not thank her. He found her at 7 in the morning in the muniment room, which nobody entered, on a ladder, with her sleeves pinned back. "Miss Mowbray." She did not startle. She looked down. "Your Grace, your third shelf is misfiled." "My third shelf has been misfiled since 1794. "Yes," she said. "I can see when it began. Somebody has put the Renholt leases in with the Mark Hollow ones, and then somebody else, finding them there." concluded that Mark Hollow must once have been part of Renholt, and wrote a note to that effect, and the note has been believed for 30 years. She came down the ladder with a bundle of them under her arm. It is not true. Your grandfather bought Mark Hollow from a man called Peveril in the year of the comet, and paid too much, and the deed is here, and it is quite plain, and I should not have gone through your papers, and I have no defense except that the door was open and I have been awake since 5. He had gone into that room to be alone. He stayed for 2 hours. She had her father's Latin, and no money, and a mind like a well-kept knife. She had rid the estate's ruinous old rental of 1780 for pleasure. She asked him about drainage in the low meadows, and then argued with him about it, courteously, and was right, and did not gloat, which he found he minded more than gloating. At 8, the bell went for Mrs. Vance's chocolate, and she put the leases down in the middle of a sentence and stood up. "Let her wait," said Osric. "No," said Hesper. "I am the Duke of Corendon. In this house," she said quietly, "I am a woman with £4 a year, and when the fortnight is over I go back into her carriage, and you do not come with me. Please do not make my life more expensive than it is, your grace. You would not mean to, but you would." She went out. He stood among his own papers with his ears burning like a boy's. It got worse. He was aware, with the exactness of a man who has run an estate out of debt, that he was in the process of losing something, and he could not find the ledger it was written in. He watched Sidonie Frayne in the long gallery drop her fan and say, "Hesper, do," and watched Hesper stoop. And he crossed the gallery and picked it up himself, and gave it to Sidonie with a bow so cold that she coloured to the roots of her golden hair, and he heard the room go silent, and he did not care. He heard Arabella Vance say, laughing, that cousin Hesper had once had an offer from an apothecary, and had refused it, and fancy an apothecary, and she refusing. He learned from his grandmother's maid. He was reduced to that. He, Corendon. Questioning a lady's maid on a back stair like a lovesick ensign. That Miss Mowbray had sat up 9 nights with Drusilla Vance through the scarlet fever 3 winters ago, when the daughter had been sent away to Bath for safety and the servants had all given notice. And that Mrs. Vance's first words on recovering had been to complain that the room smelt of vinegar. He went out and rode for 4 hours in the rain, because here it was, at the bottom of him, ugly and true. He did not want her. He had refused his grandmother in that yellow saloon out of the deepest pride he had, the one thing his father's ruin had left him, that he was not moved, not led, not arranged. And now the old woman had put a woman in his path, and he had looked and he was moved, and every step he took towards Hesper Mowbray felt like a step taken at Augusta's command. She had chosen for him, he thought savagely, with the rain in his face. She had known him better than he knew himself, and she had laid it out like a hand of cards. And if he took the woman she had picked, he took her from his grandmother's hand. And under that, quieter and more dangerous. If he did not take her, he lost her, because on the 11th day that carriage went, and she went in it, and he would be a man who had once carried a bandbox and let the rest go by. He came in wet and did not change, and found her in the little south parlour alone, mending. The candles were lit. It was that hour when the light goes blue at the windows and gold inside. She had a shawl about her shoulders that had been a good shawl a long time ago. She looked up and saw the state of him, and said nothing at all about it, which was a mercy he had not expected and did not deserve. "Miss Mowbray," he said, "do you know why you were invited here? To carry Mrs. Vance's," she said. "You were not." She set down her needle. She was very still. He had learned in 11 days that her stillness was not meekness, it was a door, closed and held. "Your Grace," she said carefully, "your grandmother is a great lady, and she is kind, and she is old, and she has taken a fancy, I think, to be kind to me in a way that will cost me a great deal when it is over. I would rather she did not. I have a place. It is a poor place. It is mine. I have kept it 11 years by being useful and by not being noticed, and in a fortnight you have undone that so thoroughly that Sidonie Frayne no longer troubles to be pleasant to me, even when there are witnesses. And Mrs. Vance has twice asked me what I have been about with the Duke." Her voice did not rise. It got quieter, which was far worse. "I have nothing, sir. I have no money, no protector, and no beauty. My whole fortune is that nobody has ever had cause to say my name in a certain tone. You are spending it very fast, and it is not yours to spend. He came across the room. He stopped a yard away, because he had at least that much left. And if I told you, he said, that what she intends, what she has intended from the first, is that I should marry you? The needle fell. She did not pick it up. For a long moment she did not speak. Then she laughed, one soft, cracked breath of a laugh, and put her hand over her eyes, and he understood with a lurch that she was not laughing at all. That was cruel, she whispered. Hesper, you must not. She stood up. The shawl slid. You must not say such things to a woman like me, your grace, not even in jest, not even in kindness, 'cause I am not a fool, and I know precisely what I am, and I have known it for 11 years, and it does not hurt any more unless someone holds up the other thing and lets me look at it. It was not a jest. Then it is worse. She turned on him, and her eyes were wet and absolutely furious. Then she has chosen me, like a bonnet, and you will do it because she asks you, and you will be very good to me, and very just, and in 10 years you will look at Sidonie Frayne across some ballroom and you will wonder, I would rather carry caps until I die. I would rather be nothing, honestly, than be your grandmother's charity in a coronet. Miss Mowbray, do you even know, she said, what colour my eyes are? You have looked at me for 11 days. You had 5 years, and you did not know my name. The silence rang. He looked at her. Grey, said the Duke of Quarrendon, grey with a darker ring at the outside, and a fleck of brown in the left one low, near the corner. And when you are angry, the whole of it goes flat and cold like the lake in November, and when you are amused you look down and to the right, and press your under lip so, because you have spent 11 years not being permitted to laugh out loud in a room. She had gone white. And I do not know, he went on low, how to prove to you that this is mine and not hers, but I will not do it here in a parlour, where you can tell yourself it was pity. Ask me at the ball, Hesper. Ask me in front of all of them. He picked up her needle from the carpet and set it in her hand and closed her fingers over it, and his hand stayed a half-second too long on hers. Then he bowed and left her and did not trust himself to look back. The ball at Renholt was talked of for 30 years afterwards, and by people who had not been there. 400 candles went up in the great chandeliers of the long saloon. The crystal drops turned slowly in the heat of them and threw broken light over the shoulders of half the county. There was ice brought up from the ice-house in barrows. There was a floor chalked with a design of laurel that the first quadrille destroyed. Osric stood at the head of the room and received them all with a face like a shut door, and his grandmother sat beside him in black velvet and diamonds, saying nothing whatever, and enjoying herself so much that she had to keep her fan up. At 10:30, Lady Sidonie Frayne came in. She was, he granted her that, magnificent. White satin and the Frayne pearls in 3 ropes and gold hair dressed high with a bandeau, and she came up the room on her father's arm, knowing to the inch what she was worth. And there was a murmur, and she heard the murmur, and it fed her. She curtsied to him very low. Your Grace, she said, it is a lovely ball. Everyone says you will announce something tonight. She let that sit glittering in the air between them, and then she smiled with her lashes down. I have kept the 2 after supper free. How prudent, said Osric. He waited. 11 o'clock. The room filled and turned and glittered. He danced with a Frayne cousin because he must, and with the wife of his own vicar because she was kind, and he answered when spoken to, and every 12 seconds his eyes went to the door under the musicians' gallery, and she was not there, and she was not there, and she was not there. At 11:15 he was standing by the great chimney-piece with his hands behind his back, and he understood with a cold, spreading certainty that she was not coming, that she had thought it out, in her clever, ruined, careful way, and had decided that a woman with £4 a year does not walk into a ballroom to be asked a question in front of 200 people, because if the answer is not the one she wants, she has nowhere to go, and no one to take her there. He set down his glass and started for the door to go and find her, and Drusilla Vance's voice rose behind him in delight. Hesper, no, no, I did not send for you. Go up, child, go up. You cannot come in there. He turned. She was standing just inside the doorway under the gallery in grey. It was the grey silk. He knew it because he had seen it twice in 11 days. An old gown made over, the silk gone soft and thin at the elbows where such silk goes. with a plain white ribbon at the waist tied by her own hands, and no jewels of any description, none, not so much as a paste pin, and her dark hair pinned up simply, and her chin level, and her face perfectly white. Around her the satin, the pearls, the gold. 200 people in the finest clothes the county could raise, and a woman in a turned gown standing at the edge of it, exactly where she had stood at the edge of every room she had ever been in. The music went on for 4 bars and stopped. It was Sidonie who laughed. She did it beautifully, a light-carrying silver laugh, and she said to the whole room in the tone of one making a charming observation, "Oh, but she has come down. Look, Mrs. Vance, your poor cousin has come down to us. Is it the same grey?" "I do believe it is the same grey she wore at Hartwell. How loyal she is to it." The room laughed, not all of it, enough. And Hesper Mowbray stood at the door and did not run and did not weep and did not look down. She looked across the room over all the pearls and all the candles. And she found him, and she lifted her chin the last half-inch, and he saw what it cost her, and he saw that she had come anyway, because he had asked her to, and because she had decided, somewhere on the back stairs, that if she was going to be broken, she would be broken standing up. Osric, Duke of Quarrendon, walked out into the middle of his own ballroom. He did it slowly. He came down the whole length of that glittering floor with his hands at his sides, past the Frains, past the Marchmoors, past the 400 candles and the turning crystal. And everybody moved out of his way, and nobody breathed. And Sidonie Frain turned her white shoulder and made ready her most gracious face, because he was, of course, coming to her. He went past her as though she were a chair. He stopped in front of the woman in the grey silk. The whole room at his back made one small sound. "Miss Mowbray," he said, "Your Grace." Her voice was not steady. It was, he thought, the bravest sound he had ever heard. "You were to ask me a question." She swallowed. He watched her gather herself, the way she had gathered a shawl and a work-bag and a lap desk and a bandbox in the rain, alone, while 20 people talked in the porch. "Then I ask it," said Hesper Mowbray clearly, so that they heard her at the far end. "Whose choice am I?" And the Duke of Quarrendon turned round. He looked at them, at all of them, at Drusilla Vance with her hand at her mouth, at Arabella, at the Frains, at the county, at Sidonie standing quite alone now in the middle of the floor in her 3 ropes of pearls, with her smile still on and nothing behind it. He looked lost at his grandmother, small and black and upright by the chimney-piece, watching him with her fan folded, giving him nothing. "My grandmother," he said, and his voice went down that room like a stone down a well, "chose a bride for me a fortnight ago. I refused her. I told her in this house that I would not be handed a wife like a horse at auction, and I meant it, and I mean it still. She has no power to marry me, nor has any of you." Nobody moved. She named a name, and I said, "Who?" He let them hear it. He let it be as ugly as it was. I had been in rooms with this lady for 5 years. I had passed her the salt at my own table. I had heard her wit and laughed at it and not troubled to turn my head, and when I was told her name I said, "Who?" "That, madam," to Sidonie, without heat, which was worse than heat, "is the whole of what is wrong with this room, and I have been the worst of you, because I had the most light to see by, and I shut my eyes." Sidonie Frain's smile was gone. "You have all had 11 years of her," he said. "She has sat up with your fevers and written your letters and carried your caps and mended your flounces on her knees, and you have paid her in 2 gowns a year and a name spoken as if it were a bell to ring. You have looked straight through her, and so did I. Well, I have looked at her now." He turned back to Hesper, and his hard, cold, brooding face did something the county had never seen it do. "You ask whose choice you are," he said low. "Not my grandmother's. She made me open my eyes. She could not make me love what I saw. She could not make me stand in the muniment room at 7 in the morning and be argued out of my own drainage. She could not make me lie awake counting 11 days, nor make me carry a bandbox up my own steps in the rain like a fool, nor make me learn the fleck of brown in your eye. That was not hers, that was mine. Every part of it was mine, and I would have come to it in the end without her, only later, only too late, only after that carriage had gone." He drew a breath. "I am not obeying anybody, Hesper. I am asking, before all of them, so that no one in this county, including you, madam, when you doubt it at 3 in the morning, as you will, can ever say it was arranged." And the Duke of Corendon, in front of 200 people, drew off his right glove and went down on one knee on the chalked floor of his own ballroom and held up his bare hand to a woman in a turned grey gown. "Marry me," he said, "not because she chose you. Because I have, and I do, and I shall go on doing it every day of my life in front of anyone who cares to watch." For a moment Hesper Mowbray could not speak at all. Then she put her hand into Hane, capable, unadorned hand, without a ring on it, that had held a needle an hour ago, and closed her fingers over his signet, and said, not loudly, but in a voice that carried to the very back of that silent, blazing, crystal-hung room, "I have been in the corner of your rooms for 5 years, your Grace. I should like to come out of it." The Dowager Duchess Augusta put up her fan again. She was not smiling. She was, for the first time in the memory of anybody present, crying, and she did it as she did everything, without apology and without noise. Afterwards there was a good deal of confusion. Drusilla Vance recovered enough to say, loudly, that of course she had always regarded dear Hesper as a daughter, and was met by the Dowager Duchess with a stare of such glacial civility that she sat down and did not rise again for an hour. Arabella wept in a doorway. The Fraines went home before supper. Sidonie went down the steps to her carriage through a crowd that had somehow stopped looking at her, and got in without a word, and it was noticed, such things are always noticed, that not one person came out to see her go, and the county talked for a month, and then found, to its considerable disappointment, that there was nothing to talk about, because when the Duke of Corendon brought his Duchess to church for the first time, in a plain grey silk that she had refused to give up, and had merely had a new white ribbon put upon, he handed her out of the carriage in front of every soul in the parish and did not let go of her hand going up the path, and there was not a woman there over 60 who did not go home and say that she had never seen anything like it. He gave her the muniment room. That was the first thing. He had the third shelf carried out, and the misfiled leases with it, and put in new presses and a good lamp and a fire that was lit every morning at 6. And there she sat over the rentals of Wrenholt and Mark Hollow with her sleeves pinned back. And within 2 years the Low Meadows were drained her way, which he never once admitted aloud and told everybody about constantly. He gave her the Corendon emeralds, and she wore them kindly twice a year to please him. He gave her at last the thing she had never had, which was the right to laugh out loud in a room, and she used it. And the sound of it in that great cold house was such that the servants would stop on the stairs to listen, and the old butler said once, to nobody, that he had worked at Wrenholt for 40 years, and had not known till now that it was a house you could be happy in. His grandmother lived 9 years more, out of pure obstinacy, and spent them in a chair by the fire being brought her drops by a duchess who fetched them herself and would not be argued with. On the last afternoon she took Hesper's hand and Osric's together in her own and said, with great satisfaction, "I chose her, you know." "You did not," said Osric. "No," said the Dowager Duchess Augusta, closing her eyes. "I only opened the curtains. Well, somebody had to." And long afterwards, when his hair was grey, and their sons were grown and gone, and the Wrenholt ballroom had been shut up for years, the Duke of Corendon would still, on winter evenings, come into the little south parlour where his wife sat mending by the fire with a shawl about her shoulders, and stand a moment in the doorway before she knew he was there. He did it on purpose. He had told her why once. Because there had been 5 years in which she had been in every room he entered and he had never once looked, and he had promised himself, kneeling on a chalked floor with his glove off, that for the rest of his life he would never come into a room she was in without stopping first to see her. She always looked up. She always knew. "Well," she would say, with the needle still in her hand and the firelight on her plain, clever, beloved face, "And who are you looking at, your Grace?" And he would cross the room and take the needle away from her and lift her hand and answer her the same way every time for 40 years. "You," said Osric, "only ever you."